In 2019, after a lifetime of using her art to advocate for those who are unrepresented, Gladys Barker Grauer was finally celebrated for her work.
I am humbled by being honored by such a prestigious organization as the Women's Caucus for Art. Thank you, thank you, thank you. In those times, from the South, the family would migrate to where the other one was. And most of my family, they had all migrated to Cincinnati. The ones in Cincinnati migrated to Chicago with my mother. So I had family in Cincinnati and in Chicago. That was during the Depression, and my stepfather was a construction worker. So therefore, they went wherever the construction was being done, which would be in different cities, states, etc. And my mother and I eventually ended up in Chicago. My stepfather was and she was not that. She was one of these young women who wasn't taking that stuff. So she left and she came and hid in Chicago, and that's where we settled. Art as a child was just art as a child. And when I got into high school, I began to draw. And the high school art was not very stimulating at all. And I found out that you could take classes at the Art Institute on Saturdays. So I started going to the Art Institute on Saturdays when I was in high school. And I took painting and drawing and stuff like that. So when I graduated from high school, that's where I decided I was going to go. And this is something that I hadn't thought about before, but when I was in high school, it was a integrated high school, but probably integrated on the books. But as far as dealing with the students, I remember as a senior, they told me something about I had a conference with the guidance counselor. I never heard of a guidance counselor. Now this is a senior in high school. I never heard of a guidance counselor, so I went to see the guidance counselor. And the guidance counselor says to me, telling me what I should do when I graduate. I should register with the something. I don't know if the WPA was in then or not, if I should register with all that. And she said, because, you know, you're not going to college, so blah, 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 blah. So I sat there and I listened to her. And I thought, well, I'm not going to college, okay. So I said, well, I'm going to the Art Institute. She said, well, you know, you register with the WP, telling me to register with the WPA, or whatever it was. But there was no encouragement whatsoever. I don't know why I decided to go to the Art Institute, because nobody encouraged me to. It was a very nice experience. It was first place there were 1, 2, 3. I think there were only 3 black kids in my beginning class. The Arts Institute at that time was a very small, exclusive school. I think for the 4-year, if you took all the students in the 4 years, you wouldn't have had 400 students. The courses were very good. I learned everything I learned there, and I'd say it was an excellent school. And I'll go into another thing which you can is that being dark skinned, I can tell you relates problems or certain. Let's say I felt more discomfort within my race being dark skinned and dating.
40 years before the slogan, Black is Beautiful became popular, social order and beauty within the Black community was often linked to the shade of a person's skin.
I remember a relationship when I was a student at the Art Institute. These two young men, they went with me to the school dance because I didn't have an escort, and I thought, very good. And we get there, and they completely abandoned me for some yellow girls. That's the only way I can put it. And they don't know how much they hurt me. You know, I had to go back home. They didn't even have the courtesy of one of them to, you know, see me back home or anything like that. So I was let's put it this way, I was used to these kind of treatments. Not that I'm not saying that all my relationships with the black fellas were that way, but none of them really, none of them really. I didn't feel as good as I felt with him because he made me feel like he thought I was cute. He thought I had the cutest little nose and just things like that made me feel very good.
She had the support of a very loving family. Her husband, who was kind of the opposite of Gladys, as Gladys is outgoing, he was quite, quiet and certainly a wonderful foil for Gladys.
If you live in New York, there's all sorts of activities, social activities. There's picket lines, there's this kind of meeting, there's that kind of meeting. And I went to the meetings of the SWP, which was the Socialist Workers' Party. And I used to go to their meetings. And he was a member of the SWP. And one time there was a picket line, and I didn't know him personally. But I was on the picket line, and he was also on the same picket line. And the police were out there with their horses. And what they were doing was trying to make people move back, but there were so many people you just couldn't move back. But what they had was the horses. They would run the horses down, turn the horses around with their butts to you, and then the horses would kick back, and people could get hurt like that. Well, I was not familiar with that technique. And I'm standing there, and the policemen, and they rode down, they turned their horses around, and he grabbed me and pulled me out the way. Otherwise, the horse would have kicked me. That was Black Woman in Visual Perspective. When I opened the gallery, artists came from everywhere. I didn't know there was any artist in New Jersey until I opened that gallery. And they came swarming in, African American artists, because they had no place. I didn't know there was no venue for them. And Alita, Nettie Thomas, and Janet Pickett. And these three women, we started, the three of us, they were the first three Black women artists I knew. And we got very close. And what I did was I stopped to think. I had gone to art school. I had done a whole lot of freelance artwork. I got married. Then I had children. And all I was doing was freelance artwork, designing T-shirts, printing T-shirts, but not doing any real creative artwork myself. So that's why I took this opportunity to open the gallery, and I figured, well, I have a studio space to work in away from home, and my youngest child was like 7 or 8 years old, so, and the gallery was just a few blocks from the house and his school. So when he got out of school, he came to the gallery, so that was pretty good. But I began to think that I had not done any real creative artwork. I looked at these 3 young women. Alida Caldwell was a teacher. Nettie Thomas was a teacher. She was married, and she had a child. Janet Pickett was young, married, probably would have children, blah, blah, blah. And I thought, these young women, if they get too tied up in they got the job, some of them got the children, they got the house, they got the husband. Eventually, these things are going to crowd out their artwork just as it had crowded out mine.
I met Gladys when I was teaching at Weequahic High School because Gladys had the art studio gallery in the Weequahic section. She also had a neighbor, Alida Caldwell. Alida and I taught together, and we were very good friends. She introduced me to Gladys in her gallery, and that's where we started just meeting and talking, and eventually with Gladys's help drew in a group of female artists.
I had been doing art in high school, but never with the thought that it would be a career. I sort of drank the Kool-Aid that, it wasn't a possibility, especially because I had kids. I had 3 kids, one of which wasn't even a year old yet. So she said, I want you to pick your best piece of artwork, and I'm going to tell you where to go. And she sent me to Gladys on Bergen Street to her gallery. And she invited me to join Black Women in Visual Perspective. And while I was there talking to her, Alida walked in with one of her paintings.
The relationship between Gladys and Janet Taylor Pickett is a long and seasoned one.
Even if there were times when she and I hadn't talked for a while, she was always the same. I mean, sometimes you never knew what was going to come up. What was going to come up with Gladys was going to come out. If she didn't believe in something, if she didn't agree with something that you said, she was going to let you know about it. It's always been her authenticity and her belief in her art.
The late artist and educator, Russell Murray, was celebrated within the new group as its only male and honorary member.
First, we sort of put out a general call. But that didn't work because you got people with hobbies, They paint by numbers, they do this, they do that. So, no, that wasn't what we wanted. We wanted women who really wanted to be professional artists. Anyway, we ended up with approximately 10 to 12 women, which went on to form this organization. And we had certain rules and regulations. I think in the beginning, each one of us donated $50. There was no dues. We donated $50 for what each person donated $50 for whatever would be necessary. Our resolution was that we would have at least 3 exhibits a year, of which we must have at least 2 pieces of new artwork in each exhibit. That was the thing, was to keep the artists working and creating.
Miss Gladys is a lot to me. Miss Gladys is, or Miss Grauer is, I can't say Gladys, Miss Grauer is my mentor. She is, I want to say, my best friend. She represents so much to me. She represents women artists, women, African American women taking charge. Her desire for social change took her into a race for the U.S. Senate in 1960.
The reason that I knew about the position because a friend of mine was a substitute, and he used to substitute in the Essex County Vocational School. And he knew that the position was open, and he knew that I was capable of the position. So anyway, I got in touch with the principal, and I was interviewed by the principal, and he was very happy with me, and fine, things went on and on. But after about a week or two, and I didn't hear anything, I called the principal up, and he said, well, I haven't heard anything from the county yet, and in the meantime, this friend of mine keeps telling me that they keep bringing in teachers. They keep interviewing teachers and bringing in teachers, hiring teachers. And teachers work a day or two and they quit. So I wrote a letter. I got in touch with Donald Payne Sr. and Sharp James at that time. I think he was, I don't know if he was district leader or both of them. They wrote a letter to the county superintendent and said, you know, this woman has applied for the job and you've hired everybody, you've hired, and they had a list of all the people, how many people had been hired, but you've never interviewed her. So they called me in for an interview. And you've never heard such an interview. Well, we have things here, you know, at that time they had no women in the system. They were hiring, there was a thing about hiring women and also black women. So I said, well, we're being accused of racism and we're not racist, but look, we'll interview you, look, we'll hire you for the job, but we know you can't do it. He told me, he knew I couldn't do it. I said, okay. They hired me for the job, and I did that job.
At first we had a teacher who wasn't up to speed with what was really going on in the school system and the community, and Gladys Barker came in the following year, and she began to straighten out the class.
These seniors, when I walked in, they met me, and it was a big classroom because it was a shop. It was a vocational school, it was a shop, it wasn't a little classroom. They came in, they looked at me, and they went and they sat way over on the other side of the room. I sat at my desk, I got up, I gave my lesson, they sat there and they looked at me, and they laughed, and they just had a good time. And then after I finished giving them the lesson, they went on and had their conversation. They talked about this and they talked about that. And then finally one of them said to me, said, Miss, I'll give you till this afternoon.
So we do a sound in class and go, Gladys, Gladys, Gladys. And she turned around looking and, who said that? You better cut it out. So I kept doing that for a while. Then she found out it was me. And the other guys in class, they would have they were falling out, we were rolling all over about it.
I said, well, you know what? I said, I'm gonna tell you something. They're paying me a lot of money to be here. And you're not gonna run me out, you're not gonna run me away from this money. They laughed, they thought I was the funniest thing in the world. So we got through that day. Next day we came back, they said, she came back. Well, we got something for her. And I heard that they had, when they hired this white teacher from New York, that they had taken and glued her hat to the wall, nailed her coat to a chair or something like that. I was not afraid of them because I'm going to tell you, I could tell the way they were dressed. I could tell the way they talked. There was somebody at home that didn't know what they were doing. So I said, okay. Friday came, I went down to the office. I got everybody's mother's phone number. Called everybody's mother.
She called my mama. My mother came to school. Whoa, boy, that was it. Because, you know,
got to work Monday morning. I don't have them till the afternoon. I go to my classroom at 9 o'clock in the morning and they all standing there. You know what? If you were married or you had a family or you had something to do over the weekend instead of getting on the phone gossiping, yeah, blah, 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 and honey, they fussed. I went on in the room. They came in the classroom, sat down just as nice. Start doing what I told them to do. I always remember that. And afterwards, I had a lot of fun with them because what I did was, you're talking about racism. It was there. My first thing I did was plan a trip to take them to a silk screen shop, to take them to a art shop where they did the artwork they were supposed to be getting trained for. Well, these white teachers were giving me, oh, no, you shouldn't take them on a trip because they'll steal. Anyway, I took them, I was able to take them on trips to different shops so they could see what was being done in the shops. Now, where I really ran into a big thing, at that time, The Wiz was playing on Broadway. And I wanted to take them to see The Wiz. Well, this had to go through the county superintendent's office. They said, why would you take vocational kids to a Broadway show? You have to write a justification. Well, honey, I wrote them a justification. Thing number one, you have electric shock. These kids need to know there's something besides sockets and light bulbs and stuff like that. They need to know that there's a big career out there in lighting for electricians. The carpentry students, the stage counter, everything is built by carpenters. I went down the line about the design, the drapes, and all the sort of things that relate to vocational schools. Got it. Every year I took my kids to see a Broadway show.
Her accidental meeting of Solomon Grauer was just the beginning of a lifetime of shared experiences, including Gladys's later drive to restore art as a prominent part of her life.
And he starts telling me about a movie. He loved foreign films. And he started telling me about a movie that he had seen and how great it was. And I would really like to see, he would really like for me to see that movie. And then we talked and he said, well, I'll pick you up. He said, he asked me where I lived and I told him, he said, well, I'll pick you up after work. And where do you work? And I told him where I work. So I thought, okay, I'll see you another time. And sure enough, when I got out of work, he was standing there waiting for me. And he took me to dinner, and then we went and we saw the movie. And he said, so then he told me he would see me after work or something the next day. I said, yeah, And after that, he was just one of these people who, if he said he's going to do something, he did it. And I was not used to that kind of man. The thing that I was happy about was that he was somebody that loved me. He had treated me better than any guy had ever treated me.
In the 1940s, she married a white man, and he married a black woman. And she did not care what other people thought. Obviously, if she cared what other people thought, she wouldn't have married him. So she does not do what she does to be controversial. It's who she is.
Look, we were just young and foolish, that's all. I can't even think that we even thought seriously about what we were doing. or what effect it was going to have on anybody or anything. I hadn't really thought about it as an interracial marriage, you know. First place, I had had a lot of boyfriends, believe me. When I was in Chicago, I had boyfriends, and none of them, I don't even want to go through some of the relationships. But he was the most honest guy that I had met. I mean, he was the guy who said he'd be there, or he would take me here, or we would go here, and he did it. There was no relationship with this family until after the baby was born. So we were married 6 years before we had the first child. The first child was born, then his mother came over to see them. That was when I first met his mother. Well, all my mother wanted to see was a marriage license. She didn't want no living together and that sort of stuff. She was happy to see a marriage license. Everything I did was perfect. When I was in an exhibit and he's walking around, and if he heard anybody say anything that he didn't approve of, he'd immediately start explaining to them that this was the best artwork that ever was. He was unbelievably unafraid. One time we were out walking. At that time, I had the two little girls and the baby in the carriage. And we were crossing the street. And I think as we crossed the street, I crossed first with the two little girls. We were in the front. My husband was behind with the carriage. And I don't know how whether the car came between them and us, but my husband was furious because he thought they almost hit the carriage, or they almost hit us or something. And he started screaming and hollering at the guys in the car. These guys jumped out the car with a wrench, and that didn't stop him at all. He's screaming and hollering and cussing at. He could cuss like a sailor. He's screaming and hollering and cussing at him, and they're waving this wrench around that they're going to hit him with it and all that. And finally, they got in the car, and when, of course, my heart was, because it was two black guys, I could just see them just laying him out there in the street. But he wasn't afraid. That just because they jumped out with a wrench or something, that didn't make him close his mouth.
I think Ani actually started the conversation about Saul and how he took Saul to lunch one day because he was trying to get some information. And when they left the house, Gladys said, no matter what you do, don't let him buy any cigarettes. So, of course, he and Ani got out, had lunch, and came back, and Saul asked to stop at the store to get cigarettes. And when Ani admonished him, Saul went into another group, a whole list of expletives about why he should mind his own business. And he was a grown man, so she chuckled a lot about that.
We were married 49 years when my husband died. We were married in 1947. So there was a big historic snowstorm that year. That's the morning that we trekked. There was no transportation running. That we trekked to City Hall and got married.
What I'm saying about my mother is that she's a pioneer in creating murals for the city of Newark. And that she, when I say pioneer in creating, she never works by herself. So whenever she's working on a mural or anything like that, she always has younger artists, other artists, artists in training who are always working with her. She does not do that kind of project by herself. You can go to some places, and I'm not going to name particular places, but you can go to some places and it looks like everything was just planned out perfectly. And, you know, Newark is a little different. We have our way of doing things. So, you know, my mother did some of the earliest murals that were in Newark. And, you know, have been a lot of murals since she, you know, really began that. And they are all subject to opinions. Most of them are great. Some of them are okay. And a couple of them are, what the heck? And who and why? But the point is that it's art and it's up there and it's out and it's subject to our examination.
Gladys started her mural career, I think, with, I hope I don't get contradicted, with the mural that she painted for me at Arts High School, with grant money that I got from the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation. They used to give teachers, I was a Dodge teacher, and they used to give teachers $1,000 every year if you were a Dodge teacher to work on a project. And so I gave Gladys my $1,000 to work on that project. And I became art department chair of Arts High School. There had not been a large-scale project done in Arts High School since 1936, when Arts High School was started. And of course, one of the things that I wanted to do was to maintain that tradition. And so I asked Gladys Grauer to paint a mural, the first large-scale mural that had been painted in Arts High School since 1936, to paint a mural at Arts High School. So she came in, she worked with two students who are now artists in Newark, as they would do, two little sophomores, and who've gone on to since become artists and mural painters in Newark. And they painted a mural, and that was the beginning of Gladys Grauer's career as a mural painter in 2005. She painted a couple of murals. I know she painted one for the Student Center, the Marion Bolden Student Center. And I think the next big one that she painted was for City Walls. And she was in the midst of painting it, and I get a phone call from Larry Hilton. He says, "Arnie, you gotta help Gladys. She's painting a mural and she's 86 years old." And I said, "Gladys don't need no help being 86 years old." He said, no, we gotta come down there and help her paint this mural. So, of course, you know, when Larry calls, whatever he tells me to do, I usually try to do it. But also, it was Gladys, and they were under a bridge painting a mural, and I went down there and we went and helped her get this mural painted. She kind of elicits that kind of loyalty.
And a lot of her murals center around music and people's activities and that kind of thing. The kind of a lifeblood of a city is really what she reflects a lot of times in her murals. And there's one up on the switching station, PSE&G switching station. That was the latest one, and that was a really gigantic. We talk about visual art, and this is something that my mother's been a big part of. And what I see right now impacting is the whole proliferation of murals.
The norm in this house was social justice. We grew up in a house where next to the Star Ledger and the New York Times and the Newark Evening News was also the latest edition of the Black Panther. and that's from as far back as I can remember. And other, the militant and other, so-called radical newspapers. So there was a lot of reading. There were books, some of the earliest books that I just remember before I could even read well. Jerry Rubin's We Are Everywhere, James Baldwin books, Leroy Jones at that time, books. All sorts of books on political topics, on women's rights. And I just remember my parents always talking about what was right for the majority of people, for the poor people.
She did black people with dignity. If they were poor and she did a picture of them, you saw the dignity of them. Like she did the homeless woman there, and she's sitting there, and she has her cart. She has a whole house in her cart. She has a family, pictures and Bible and all that. And she's sitting there, she's weaving out of plastic. She's making bags to sell and pocketbooks and things like that. Now what she shows is that this woman is still creative under the conditions that she lives. It didn't kill her spirit to create. It didn't kill her spirit as a human being.
One time I saw a painting of hers, showing this little boy with a boombox. So I said, Gladys, why are you painting this kid that was just walking down the street with a boombox? Because I associated that with negatives, because they'd be blasting the music and the cursing and stuff like that. She said, no, Ben. She said, this is all he has. And so that's what gives him dignity. And I said, boy, look how much I'm learning from, she's very humanist, because she's about people and seeing that everything is fair to all the people, not just to a certain class of people.
Also, I'd become interested in the corrugated because I had read this article in the paper, and this man, it was in New York, and this homeless man had laid down in a trucking, the trucks were parked at the platform or something. He had laid down there and put corrugated over him, to keep warm. And of course, when the trucks pulled out in the morning, they didn't know if he was under. And that's where I really started using corrugated to represent the poor, the homeless. But all the things that corrugated was. It was a blanket, it was a mattress, it was a shelter.
Often we gave social gatherings at the house with music and poetry and mostly conversation. That's where we socialized with different political people, or people who were in the arts, or people who were just interested in politics or interested in the arts. And she and Saul came. They used to come to many of the gatherings, and he and my husband, Baraka, they would take the floor, because both of them were stubborn and they had two different points of view on the politics of the left. And everybody would kind of stop and just listen to them carry their polemics, And it was so much fun. It was so much fun. Because Gladys is quite political herself, which is how we got to be friends, because we both love art and politics. And she's very it was surprising, you know, because you don't meet many people, particularly women who are involved in the political life of our people the way that Gladys is, Miss Grauer.
She doesn't sugarcoat issues of poverty, issues of women who are struggling on their own. These come out in her works. They're narratives in various of her pieces that I've seen. So she is a truth teller.
Most of my work I get from the news, from what's happening. I know in I think it was San Francisco, where the police went down to wherever all these homeless people lived and just took and just burned all their stuff up. And this one woman just went crazy, screaming and hollering because her photograph, you know, her family photographs and all that stuff was there. And I realized these people, you know, walking around with these bags and pushing these carts, they don't have junk in there. They've got everything in the world they own.
There is no separation between art and life. One of the Russian constructivists, he stopped being an artist after the Russian Revolution. He said, how can I make art when people need shoes? I need to make shoes. Well, people need art and they need shoes.
Oh no, I painted on these. Oh yeah, that's when I start painting on them. See, with anything, you can only do it for as an artist, you can't keep doing the same thing over and over again because your mind goes someplace else. I can't get that loose, but that. Oh, see, that one's coming. Yeah, that one's coming apart too. This is just people who at some time have been enslaved. White people, Indians, black folks, Asians. Now before I got to the exhibit, I was getting dressed to come and everything. And my friend Russell Murray called me up and he said, Gladys, they took your 2 pieces out of the exhibit. And I said, why? And he said, I don't know. So then, of course, when I got there, my son, when I got there, my son went into investigating why. And the one of the prosecutors or something said that I was dementing or insulting officers. He felt insulted.
And Gladys's artwork has always been socially conscious, and she had a piece in that I think the police director found to be offensive, and they took it down and they put it in the closet. And so Gladys sued them, and they got it out of the closet and put it back up again. So, you know, that's the kind of person that Gladys is. You know, Gladys sued the police department in the police building and won.
My interest was in the art, in producing the piece of artwork, and making a note in society about these 2 men who were wrongly imprisoned. That's all it was. My son, first I said, well, take it down, I'll take it home. My son said, no. So what my son did was got in touch with these lawyers, and they filed a First Amendment resolution. Well, at that point, I learned exactly what the First Amendment was. I thought the First Amendment was just freedom of speech. How the First Amendment tied in with this case, the government cannot tell you what you can and cannot say. And this was a representative of the government who said that my work could not be exhibited. So the lawyers who took it, they were very interested. It was 2 women, and I'm going to say women because this whole thing evolved around women. The person who all this had been said to, when they approached him about testifying, he couldn't because he was on the board of the organization that was having the exhibit, and therefore he could not testify against the board or something like that. When we got to court, the lawyers we weren't sure they were going to be able to go through because they really had no proof. But what happened was when the state representative came, the first thing he came was with a deal. So we said, oh, my lawyer said, oh, good. He feels on the defensive. Now, the county itself did not send him or his representative. They sent another woman who was, she was one of the employees, maintenance people. Why they sent her? Because she was the one that took it down. So they sent her. So therefore there was me, female, my two lawyers, female, this female representing the county. So they were really at a disadvantage.
So she had a message, and that's a very important function of art, is to become the bearer of political messages.
So then they come back with another deal. Well, suppose we hang it back, and you do not make any public statements. We'll just put the pieces back up, and it'll be closed out. So I said, well, you know what? I can't make that promise. I said, because right now, I can hardly wait to get back home, to get on the telephone, to call everybody up I know and tell them all about it. So then they come back, and they say, okay, we'll hang the piece back.
So that was a good victory, and that shows that artists have a role in making political statements.
A Gladys Barker Grauer painting of women dancing hangs in the home of poet laureate and teacher Yusef Komunyakaa.
I think she's going to be a surprise to a lot of people who are not familiar with her work. I'm surprised that she's not better known. I'm particularly thinking of a painter like Jacob Lawrence, who is also, we can say, a political painter. I think the same intensity, the same scope of vision.
She has some paintings that were about labor unions and struggles that I thought were very powerful, that I think, they'll find an important place in history over time. So I want to be part of that as well. I purchased one of her pieces from the show for that reason.
I see in her the kind of artist who is not so concerned with, I guess, how do I say this, optics, or how powerful she appears, or how much credit is given to her, but that she's really someone who's concerned with the art and the individual artist and the human connection.
Of course, I got more publicity out of this than I could ever have paid for. I got emails from people from France. I got emails from all over the world, different artists and organizations, etc. The curator of the exhibit made a public apology to the county, to the prosecutor, for having not used the discretion and hung my artwork there. That was the thing that hurt the most.
Another picture she did that I loved, it was called National Brotherhood Week. And that was a picture of, I think, I haven't asked her and I should, that it was painted in response to a situation that happened when I was about 4 years old. My father was a union organizer. He organized the hospital workers for $11.99 at St. Michael's, which at that time was a city-owned hospital. And they had gone on strike and had marched down to City Hall, up the steps, at which time the police department happily greeted them with clubs to the head. And if you visualize the steps at Newark City Hall, it was like an assembly line. They bash them upside the head and then throw them down that flight of steps. And my father was among those people who that happened to. And I actually saw it on the news. I saw him on the news. And it was a pivotal moment in my life.
It was traumatic. We didn't know, I mean, there weren't cell phones at the time. We didn't know if he would be dead or alive. We didn't know if he'd be like comatose. You didn't know. You see that. It was very, very traumatic. I think at some point when he was at the hospital, I don't know if it was him or somebody called my mom and, knew that he was going to be all right. But before that, we had no idea. And my mother, I don't remember what she said to us. As much as she expresses in her artwork, unless you ask her specific questions and get her talking, she's not a talker. And, she'll talk about political stuff and all that, but in terms of what's going on, in terms of feeling, she internalizes a lot. And her artwork is her expression of that. His head was wrapped up in bandages. There was still blood on the bandages. He showed us the sutures. They had, I don't remember how many stitches there were, but they had stitched his head up. There was obviously swelling. And I remember just being very scared, but more so angry. They didn't slow down at all. I mean, there was a lot of conversation, especially from my father, about what had happened, but conversation between him and my mom about that incident, about the police, about attitudes towards unions, she's not the type of person to let something like that deter her.
Gladys is the root. I would describe it as, I would have to tell this person about a tree with branches, a trunk, and with roots. Gladys is the root. She planted the seed and her roots grew to enable this art community evolve and grow.
Women, stay in this position. If you see a fellow artist sort of succumbing to the pressure, grab him and pull him back.
Sister, you've been on my mind. Sister, we're two of a kind. Sister, I'm keeping my eye on you. I bet you think I don't know nothing but singing the blues. Sister, have I got news for you? I'm something. I hope you think that you're something too. Scuffling, I I've been up that lonesome road, and I've seen a lot of suns go down. But trust me, no low life's gonna run me around. So let me tell you something, sister. Remember your name. No twisters gonna steal your stuff away, my sister. We sure ain't got a whole lot of time.